cost-benefit analysis has really been thought out. It's too immediate.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key points is most of these subsidies have been in place for decades, right? They're not new, and they're unlikely, like most policies, once enacted, rarely retracted, right? Because as soon as you enact them, there's a clientele basis that's created that benefits from that policy. There are the people who make the boats, there are the farmers, there are the people who are investing in fracking. And once you give them money, that makes them even more powerful, right? Even more prepared to fight to defend that initial policy that was enacted. So from a practical standpoint, this isn't going to be easy, right? Getting rid of subsidies at this point. Certainly not something that is going to be politically done overnight, but I think there are recent signs that suggest it's possible, right? Corn ethanol subsidies that have been in place since the 70s were allowed to expire in large part in the most recent farm bill because there has been enough evidence that we aren't getting out of it what we hoped to get out of it. You know, politicians of course hope to get votes out of it in Iowa, right? But at this point, apparently, politics was at least willing to
temporarily.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. But I mean, I think that another thing to go along with that, you know, you mentioned there's one party that's completely ignoring these. I think both of them.
I was going to ask which party that was.
Both of them have been, you know, especially in this, you know, in the energy sector, really beholden to and benefiting from the same types of interests. So I think no matter what party's in office, this isn't going to be an easy nut to crack.
I think if you look at things from a fuller sustainability perspective, I mean, sometimes my students are interested in, well, you know, so you've got to be a liberal, right? You're gonna vote that way. And I said, well, you know, I might, but from a sustainability perspective, there's no choice to be made at the upper, at federal government levels. If you're going to vote to change things in a meaningful way, you might as well vote for your, you know, township supervisors or your school board, because there you may actually find some people who are willing to do things that will not get them elected to state office or federal office, but you know, they might be willing to do some things. It's a tough issue, as you say.
I would just like to point out that it's not just our problem. It's not a Pennsylvania problem or a United States problem, and something that worries me is that you know, it is a global issue at this point, and to the extent that, I mean, I worry that, you know, the game may already be over, and that, you know, the people who are playing it, you know, the big developing, fast-growing countries, China, India, and others, you know, they're gonna push this thing, and what we do may only harm ourselves and not alter the outcome. And that's a real legitimate possibility. It's depressing, right? But if that is the way that is going to go, then, you know, then you have, it changes your strategy.
Pretty much hampered our ability to have international environmental policy.
Yeah,
to this point.
Exactly. And an interesting thing along those lines, I was just doing some reading and thinking about the quantities of gas that are available in the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania and adjacent states. And it sounds very impressive. It's 141 trillion cubic feet of gas, which is now estimated by the US government to be there. Gas companies would say it's much more. USGS would say it's somewhat less. It's 141 trillion, let's say. It sounds like a big number, and it is. How long would it last if you were to use it at present day consumption levels? And remembering that 141 trillion is not going to come out tomorrow. It's going to come out over decades to extract that gas and bring it to market. I did a calculation that said if the height of this pen represents the amount of gas in the Marcellus Shale, then over the 50-year time span in which that gas will be removed, the amount of energy consumed by the United States would be about 6 feet high compared to the height of this pen. Now, that would be one thing. That would still be a pretty good contribution to our national energy. But you may have already read that the people who are at this conference in Philadelphia are already talking, wow, we could export some of this gas. We could put it on the world market. And if you think about how much gas the world is projected to use over the next 50 years, that is 29 feet above the top of this pen. And so when you think about our gas supplies in terms of world demand, when China and India and a lot of other developing countries are growing their energy consumption, this gas is, you know, it is not much when you look at it from that global perspective over the lifetime of the production. It is very small, and I think that just brings home to us maybe the necessity for thinking of that bridge now rather than coming to that realization, you know, 40 or 50 years from now, when then we've dug ourselves into another you know, hole, and we're saying, well, what's our bridge energy at this point?
I have a couple of questions, but the first is Dr. Delshad mentioned groundwater pollution and negative effects to human health specifically. Do you guys feel that we should have some kind of legal caveat in place stating that if a person's health is directly harmed by these companies and their processes, that those companies should at least, you know, pay for medical care, pay damages, something along those lines? And is it possible to do hydraulic fracturing without harming human health and groundwater?
I think the policy tendency in the past has been to let the people get hurt and then sue for damages, and then that's how they get remunerated. It seems unlikely that we have a forward-thinking policy that actually took into account and acknowledged that there might be some bad effects, but we're going to keep doing it and just put some money aside for damages. So I don't know how effective it would be, right, from a human health perspective. Once you're sick, you're sick. And so just to provide money for treatment afterwards, to me, wouldn't really be an adequate solution or really something that's likely to happen.
I think an important consideration to think about fracking, in Pennsylvania in particular, I'm thinking of, because of the Marcellus shale, which is so abundant here. I don't think most of us realize when we think of Pennsylvania, particularly those areas where the Marcellus is the underlying rock, it's mostly, it's rural land, it's forest land, it's land of low population density. That area is going to get turned into an industrial zone. Gas drilling changes the landscape. It changes the infrastructure. It puts lots more trucks on the road. It puts pipelines underground. It puts well pads that, if fully developed, would be about 750 to 1,000 feet apart. It is incredibly disruptive. So saying whether there are going to be any health effects from the Marcellus is like saying, if you walk into the production floor at you know, the ArcelorMittal steel plant in Coatesville, are you going to be safe? Maybe, but the fact is you're in an industrial zone, and there's higher risk in industrial zones, even if things work perfectly. There, accidents are going to happen. And so when we develop the Marcellus shale, we're essentially taking a large part of our state, and we are, for the very long term, altering it into an industrial state. And that, I think the hazards are inevitable under the best of circumstances when you create that kind of environment.
I mean, to the extent that all takes place on private property, you know, that's, you know, if you contract with the company to drill in your backyard and then you get sick, to a certain extent, then, well, that's on you, right? But my problem is when they're doing it on public ground,
Yeah.
you know, in state parks and forests. I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's my park. I didn't agree to this. But yet there it is happening. To me, that is shocking. I still don't understand how that happens.
Has there been any proof or evidence that it has affected anybody yet?
As I mentioned earlier, there's this EPA study that's been ordered to look at a variety of environmental and health effects. I think there have been small studies that have suggested that. There's also been plenty that have disputed it. And at this point, the more common way we've seen this brought to light is by individuals and families who have a direct, visible health effect, seeking some sort of damages that they're attributing to the fracking process, and many of them have not been very successful in convincing the legal authorities that they can pinpoint the cause of their health problems. So,
What are some of the problems that they're having?
well, because of water contamination, there's potential for all kinds of things. As I mentioned, some of the chemicals are radioactive. Some of it can be as perhaps mild as difficulty breathing from the chemicals that are released in the air, to people saying that there could be cancers caused by these. So it's kind of a full range of health issues.
Some of the cancers are, some of the chemicals are carcinogenic chemicals. I think it's important to keep in mind that natural gas drilling, I think, has some hazards associated with the water, or with the leaking gas, or with exploding pipelines and things like that, sort of dramatic things. But next time, if you drive a car and you go to the gas pump, you'll find that there's a little placard somewhere on that pump that will describe to you all of the chemicals, or some of the chemicals that are present there, and that, at least in the state of California, have been found to cause cancer. Why it's only in California, I don't know. But the idea is that we are surrounded by toxic chemicals. When you put gasoline in your car and you just catch a little whiff of something, you know, you're inhaling benzene, you're inhaling all of toluene, you're inhaling xylene and a whole bunch of other chemicals that are not very good for you. So we are living in a chemical soup. Add natural gas drilling to that, presumably there's a greater risk, but like with pumping gas into your car, if you develop leukemia, heaven forbid, 30 years from now, are you going to say, those damn gasoline companies, I'm going to sue them for every penny? Maybe not, because it's hard to actually track down the causative effects for some of these types of pollutants that are being discussed here, and they're not immediate. And so I think the health effects, like many of the other things we've talked about, to some extent mysterious at this point.
I'm going to ask one final question, and then if anybody else has any questions for each individual panelist, they can ask it. It's kind of a general question, considering we touched on basically list the benefits and detriments of hydraulic fracturing. I wanted to get each panelist's opinion as it currently stands now with Pennsylvania law and how we are dealing with fracking. Would you say that the benefits, like jobs and economic promise, outweigh the detriments, like health hazards currently?
My personal opinion is that it's hard for me to know, because part of it is like, what are we doing right now versus what's it going to look like in 5 years or in 10 years? I mean, how big it's going to get? And so I would be reluctant to say that wouldn't want to be the one to say that there's no circumstances where we should be drilling for this stuff. Because I think there might be a good reason to do it in certain places where the damage is minimized or the risks are not over the top. On the other hand, I think you could definitely overdo it too. You know, I don't want these things in state parks. I want to be camping next to an oil rig. And I think we do have to be cognizant that we don't want to ruin all of our groundwater before we know what we're doing. So, you know, I think a cautionary approach is good. Baby steps are nice. I don't think there's any reason to be, you know, rushing into this. But in terms of like, you know, what is the right thing? Like, I would say, you know, let's just move slowly and carefully.
I mean, I think everybody's opinion kind of is dictated by where they sit in society, and I'm lucky to have a job that is in many ways not directly at least impacted by this. I guess, you know, we are a state institution. The state's getting some revenue from the gas drilling, maybe it trickles down to me at some level, but we'll say for the most part, not directly affected by that. I live close enough that I walk to work, so I don't really even use much energy. My home's heated and cooled by geothermal power, so to me, there's not a whole lot of value in natural gas. So it's easy for me to say, right, let's be precautionary. I don't have anything to gain from us at this point, really, personally, from investing in it, but there's a lot of people who don't sit in the position that I do, and that calculation is very different. So I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to is your individual situation. For me, it makes sense to say, let's not do it.
Let me present a scenario such as I would to a class, and right now, when we consume energy, we know very little, most of us, about where it comes from, what has to happen to create that energy, and how people are impacted at its source. And that includes both domestic and foreign energy sources. We get a lot of our petroleum, some of our natural gas from foreign sources. When we buy electronic products, or when we buy solar panels, we're buying things that are created other places, oftentimes in China. We don't know anything about the impacts that our economic choices make. For me, drilling in Pennsylvania is just bringing it home. Let it happen, I say. But you know, let it happen. People in this country and in this state need to see what happens when we consume. And Pennsylvania will feel the experiences of our exploitation of natural gas in many ways, economically, environmentally, and at least if it's in front of our noses, it'll bring us face to face with these issues about what do we really want, what policies do we need to guide us, what is it worth.
The governor suggested we drill right here, didn't he?
Yes.
So that's you're endorsing his plan.
There would be a strange bedfellows there, but yes, and I think
we could burn coal and drill for gas.
I love the idea, and also it was proposed. I don't know if you heard that the rocks that make up large parts of Bucks and Montgomery County also contain gas, as it turns out, at what are now well below economic levels. But perhaps at some time in the future, you will get asked the question, hey, should we be drilling for oil in the Triassic Rift Valley that runs through northern Chester County, Bucks County, and Montgomery County? So I don't know. I mean, I think having gas extraction go on here would be an eye-opening thing, and that might be good.
Are there any questions for the panelists?
General question regarding Dr. Lutz's analogy. You said first, just refresh my memory. What was the time frame that you said for that pen?
Oh, well, the pen
represents
the amount of natural gas in the Marcellus shale.
Yeah.
The other quantities that I talked about were the consumption of natural gas that would occur over a 50-year time frame. And I did that because 50 years is maybe an approximate time frame for Marcellus, the lifetime of the Marcellus shale.
So the that pen would be one of 30. So it would be over 3% of the energy produced over a 50-year span in the world for just Pennsylvania alone from just the Marcellus shale. If that was our only source of energy, where would that rank Pennsylvania in relation to, or per square mile in relation to other?
Just in terms of natural gas?
Sure. Yeah.
Per square mile, I couldn't tell you.
Oh.
I couldn't tell you how that would break down.
Okay.
You're thinking we might be like the Saudi Arabia of natural gas or something?
I mean, I mean,
Right?
it comes at a cost, of course, but I was thinking to myself, it's actually quite a bit of energy.
Oh, it's a huge amount of energy.
3% over 50 years and
Yes.
the planet is actually pretty significant for just Pennsylvania.
It's quite large in terms of energy at the margin. I mean, of course, you'd still have 97%
Right.
from other sources, but we tend to think about how much those little extra bits will get us.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of being the Saudi Arabia of a resource, at one point Pennsylvania was the Saudi Arabia of coal, and what we found with coal was that we developed this huge booming coal economy and a pretty decent-sized population built up in the anthracite region in northeast central Pennsylvania. And when the coal industry became less profitable, that economy collapsed, and we found ourselves in a situation where those towns became ghost towns because there was no longer industry. If we're saying that the Marcellus shale will be tapped out in 50 years, are we creating for ourselves another economic boom that's just going to collapse within conceivably the lifetimes of most, if not all, of the people in this room?
I think the evidence supports the idea that extractive economies are not, they don't build long-term successful. I mean, look at West Virginia. It's a coal mining state, and not to say that people didn't get rich digging that coal out of there. Some people did, but they could move their bank account to Cape Cod whenever they're ready to, and they just leave a hole in the ground behind. So I mean, that's the beauty of the system, is that you can trade the gas for the cash, and then you can take your cash wherever you want to go after that. So to the extent that the property rights to the gas and wealth of the gas get concentrated in a few hands instead of many hands, then you can watch that wealth cross the line, disappear. To the extent you tax it, put it back in the Commonwealth, it's a different scenario altogether. But I think I just wanted to point out one more time that this you have a valuable resource under there, and it's a pot of gold. But I would just like to say that is a pot of gold that we cannot afford to let go. Right? These carbon-based resources, their highest value is buried. And the problem is that the only way to cash in on it is to let it out. But they're worth more to the world underground than they are above it, I'm sure of it.
And a good lesson in terms of coal, you mentioned the collapse of the communities that grew up in coal mining areas. Another thing that we recognize today is that acid mine drainage, which originates from coal dump heaps as well as mines, is, or at least it was until a few years ago, Pennsylvania's #1 water pollution issue. It was an issue that affected wildlife. It was an environmental issue. It was an issue that raised the price of water treatment for people who had to cope with those acid-enriched streams and as their water supply. This, I think, will ultimately be another legacy of fracking extraction in Pennsylvania. We're going to be left with that industrial infrastructure, and long after the gas companies have ceased to care what happens to it, we're going to be having surprises from, from that infrastructure as it slowly decays underground, and we discover all of the things that we didn't comprehend before that happened. So I think all of Saudi Arabia's, we don't know what what's going to happen exactly to Saudi Arabia after they peak out in petroleum, but we've already seen it in Pennsylvania, what happens when you peak out in anthracite, and it has some long-lasting effects. They're economic effects, actually, so the economics has to be balanced out over a 50-year time frame, not just at the time.
Even in 50 years, I don't know what you would stop there. I mean, Westchester University has already been, what was it,
1871.
1870 or something, so that's already 100 and...
40.
It's a long time, so I don't know why you would stop thinking in 50, right?
Well, I was just thinking of the
Well,
time frame for
I mean,
extraction, but...
like long term.
The point was off.
Right,
Yeah.
right, okay.
I just have a question on what you're saying. So when they're doing the fracking and they're getting the gases underneath, are they destroying the land that they're getting the gases from?
No.
So like if they're getting from underneath the gas on the ground on the top, are they destroying the land?
Well, I don't know exactly how you define destroying. It's certainly getting altered a lot. I was struck today, I was looking at a cartoon that was drawn by, it's actually on the website of the Energy Information Agency of the federal government, and it shows a sort of a sketch of what happens during fracking. It shows all of the stuff underground, and the surface of the ground is just a flat surface. It's absolutely bare, there's nothing else there. You know, go to Pennsylvania, up in the regions, you know, around World's End State Park or any of those nice Allegheny National Forests in that area, it's covered with all kinds of wonderful things. And if you're gonna put in a well, some of those wonderful things have to get cut down. The ground has to get dug up. You need to build huge ponds to hold the frack water when it comes back to the surface. Roadways, pipelines get built over things. So I don't know if that counts as destroying.
I guess meaning altered, not as destroyed.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the point that you made earlier about it, this really whole industrial complex needing to be built to support this system means that even if, right, we're not, you know, thinking of something like mountaintop removal in the sense of destroying, we're certainly making it, right, unusable for many of the purposes it's currently being used for, including recreation.
Right, that was one of my questions I was saying, because I know it's going to state parks, and if it's making those state parks unusable as they were used before, I mean, that could be a concern.
Well, since we're running out of time, I'd like to thank our panelists and everybody who attended. If you are part of Dr. Sirogi's class, there's a sign-up sheet up here that you attended. Once again, we are the Political Science Club who hosts these events. We meet every other Wednesday. We currently have a meeting this week at 7:30. However, we might be attending a debate viewing. I think it's in Sykes. But we will meet in front of Ruby Jones early and probably head over and watch the viewing and the debate. But once again, I'd like to thank the panelists. If you have any questions for me or anybody, any one of the panelists, feel free to ask. But thank you all for coming out.